Hey, Adam, thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Adam Braun is a three-time award-winning entrepreneur, New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author, and acclaimed keynote speaker on innovation and leadership. His talks have been watched more than 3 million times, and the businesses he's founded have raised over $100 million to date. As CEO and co-founder of Clarisyte, a tech platform focused on enterprise sustainability whose clients represent more than $1 trillion in market cap, as well as a founder and chairman of Pencils of Promise, the organization he founded with $25 that's built more than 600 schools around the world. His talks are rooted in the authentic firsthand lessons learned through successes and struggles in building pioneering companies with renowned leaders at the front lines of industry innovation. His book, The Promise of a Pencil, How an Ordinary Person Can Create Extraordinary Change, is an international bestseller that reached the #1 spot on What Corporate America is Reading list. He's been named to Business Insider's 40 Under 40, Wired's 50 People Who Will Change the World, and is the recipient of the U.S. most prestigious award for public service, the Jefferson Award. So, Adam, you're the CEO and co-founder of Clarisyte. Tell us a little bit about your mission.
Sure. So Clarisyte really exists to help companies close the gap between intention and action. I've shared this on many different contexts, but I deeply believe that one of humanity's most wasted resources is intention. We go through this process of defining where we want to be, and yet oftentimes there's this enormous gap between that goal and the reality and the execution to get there. And so we recognize that in particular, when it comes to the enormous challenges of sustainability, there are tremendous aspirations that companies have demonstrated in where they want to be. And there has now been an emergence of many different software tools, consulting firms, and capabilities to really understand where you have been in the past that leads you to this moment. Where the gap exists that we've uniquely identified is in the ability to see into the future. It's in that ability to say, we recognize where we want to be by 2030, and yet there's also a really significant need to develop the robust capabilities so that we can understand the historical drivers that led us to this moment, so that we can forecast into the future where if things don't change, we have a deep understanding of where we will be against our goals. And then perhaps most importantly, there's the ability within the company Clarisyte that we've built and our associated software for companies to model out the different implications of various scenarios. If your company's headcount will grow a certain amount, if your business will grow or retract a certain amount, if you were to put in place different policies or initiatives or particular decisions that leadership might make across your organization, what you need to understand is what will the downstream implications be, not just for your macro goals, but for those near-term micro targets as well. And then how do you enable people to collaboratively define a plan that is agreed upon across your organization, cascade the goals out to the leaders that are making the day-to-day decisions, and then empower them and their teams with the tools to understand how they are performing against those targets on a day-to-day basis. So in totality, we refer to this as carbon planning and analysis, but it's ultimately a set of capabilities that we provide to companies to not just understand their past, but most importantly, to have a tremendous amount of clarity and confidence into their future.
Amazing. And so what inspired you to start this company? What inspires you to continue?
Great question. So I've been really fortunate to have a 20+ year friendship with my co-founder, where we met the first week of undergrad. And since then, we've taken very, very divergent and different career paths. So as you know, but perhaps some of the folks across Harvard that will watch this might not be as familiar with my career path. I started my career at Bain, and I got a tremendous set of foundational learnings while I was there. I was viewed as my version of business school on the job. And while I was at Bain, I had this idea to start the organization that became Pencils of Promise. Put $25 in a bank account in hopes of building one school and increasing access to quality education in a part of the global South. But what was really unique about our organization is that we took a very non-traditional approach to a highly traditional industry. And so within that, we really brought the head of for-profit business acumen and married that with the heart of true idealism to make impact above all. And what started with $25 scaled tremendously. Today, the organization has built more than 600 schools around the world, serving over 250,000 students. And as longtime founder and CEO, eventually I wrote the book, The Promise of a Pencil, which you heard about in the introduction. I brought in our next CEO, and today I operate as chairman of the board, where I'm still very involved. Subsequent to that, I founded an organization which I led as CEO called Mission U, which was really focused on ensuring that the next generation of talent was well equipped for the true needs, both hard skills and soft skills of the modern workforce. And we really pioneered many of the best practices that you see today in post-secondary education before our acquisition in 2018. And in 2019, I had the good fortune to start spending time with Paul Hawken, who is arguably the most important environmentalist alive, but he's, at his core, a scientist. And he really shared with me the foundational science that underpins the realities of what we are facing in the future. And I looked at that reality not through my own experience and my own future, but really through the lens of my children's timelines. And when I happened to reconnect with my co-founder, Phil, we have kids about the same age, we really started to focus on what is it that is missing from this sustainability landscape today, in particular for large, complex organizations that would most enable them to achieve these targets that they are setting. And that was the real genesis of what today is Clarisite.
It's amazing. And so it sounds like this has been a longer arc of your journey and your for purpose journey, I think, through different modalities, through the different organizations that you've, successfully scaled. What sort of impact do you hope to make with Clarisite, say 10 years from now?
Sure. So, one of the things that I think is pretty unique about my approach, and the common thread between every company that I built, is I've never built for where the world is today. I always build for where the world is headed next.
Nice.
And that is something that I spend a lot of time, not just with our organization, but with many other organizations, whether it's through the work of Clarisite, whether it's through a lot of the keynote speaking that I might do at various companies or events, or just through the writing that I do publicly, to help companies or understand, and in particular, again, for large organizations, but it's also applicable for the one-person entrepreneurial startup or the small business, in a particular industry that might not be as well known, to ensure that you are anticipating what is around the corner and preparing for tomorrow's reality today. And so with Clarisite, our big goal is to enable these large companies to close the gap, as I referenced, so team their intentions and their actions. And 10 years from now, I do deeply believe that this notion of carbon planning will be just as standardized as we see within this broader process of financial planning or business planning in the context of how leaders think about navigating their future. And in the journey of seeing around that corner, of building for where the world is headed, I do think that there are 5 incredibly powerful principles that any individual or organization can adopt. And I'll share them briefly. But the first one is that you have to develop a tremendous sense of curiosity. You have to become an insatiable learner. You have to dive deep in the rabbit hole of the particular space that you are most interested in driving some type of outcome within. And you have to become a true subject matter expert. And anybody can achieve this. It's really about commitment to becoming an insatiable learner. The second thing that you have to do is you really have to embrace the power of weak signals. And that's about spotting the subtle shifts that are happening in markets. And it doesn't happen by just reading a quick headline. It's when you start to have direct conversations with people that are living the day-to-day realities of a particular industry and asking them for these subtle signals that are emerging that you anticipate will drive a larger set of changes ahead within a particular set of industries, ideally where there's intersection between 2 trends. The third part of this framework is scenario planning. You have to explore the multiple potential futures that exist and develop a very strong set of hypotheses around which of them is most likely. And you can't use the variables of today. You have to use the variables that you anticipate will be driving these spaces tomorrow. The fourth part of this framework is you have to build a culture of experimentation. It's absolutely critical that you embrace what I call calculated risk. So not encouraging people to be enormous risk takers without consideration. It's the calculated risks. It's the micro bets that actually enable yourself and your culture as an organization or as a company to get to this place where you are truly building for where the world is headed next. And then the fifth and final piece is you have to ultimately lead with purpose. It's about finding ways to create true motivation for yourself and your people in the face of incredible odds, in the face of disruption, and leverage that sense of shared commitment to a future that you deeply believe in and want to see become a reality to inspire others to join that ultimate commitment.
That's epic. That is exactly what I was going to ask you. If you had principles, and those five are amazing. I have a few rapid fire questions for you. Um, if you can think of off the top of your head, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, I literally wrote about this today. So the best advice I've ever received is a very simple phrase. It's make the little decisions with your head and the big ones with your heart. And this plays back into exactly what I just described. The little decisions are those that are going to have short-term implications. And it's important to use rationale and the variables that exist around you in this moment. But when you're making big decisions, these have long vectors of implications. This is where you really have to listen to the voice of your heart, look at your true gut, your true intuition. And you can't depend on what the advice of others is because they're only looking at the present moment. You have to listen to your bigger voice, your voice of your heart when you are making those big critical decisions. And I deeply believe it will not lead you wrong.
Amazing. What's one counterintuitive discovery you've made?
Mm, it's a great question. So one counterintuitive discovery that I've made is that the loudest voice in the room, which is often perceived to be the greatest subject matter expert, is the one that you have to be most careful around. It's oftentimes the person who is leading the meeting, who's driving the conversation, who is most vocal, that is most likely to sway the direction of a decision solely because of the volume of their contribution. And you absolutely have to identify those who are actually listeners first. You know, some might call them introverts, but the simple phrase for me is that listening intensely is a far more valuable skill than speaking immensely. And it's really critical that you embrace that within any particular culture and that you call upon and ask for the contributions of all members that are present in any particular setting.
I love that. That ties into your principle of the power of the weak signal.
Yep,
Listening to the signal from
absolutely.
lots of different noise.
Mhm.
And what's one thing about you that people might be surprised to learn?
Well, you know, I used to say that it was that I'm ambidextrous, but the thing that most people might be surprised to learn is that I'm the father of two sets of twins.
That's
And so
wild.
we have two sets of little ones today. They're getting bigger and bigger by the moment. And it is a very, very full on but blessed experience that I'm very grateful to be a part of.
That's amazing. And just a couple more. What's your favorite book or podcast right now?
Mm. Well, my favorite book of all time is Shantaram. It's incredible. And when I wrote my book, I wanted it to feel like I was like the reader was experiencing what I felt like I experienced, just a rapid page turner that was this mix of powerful narrative that was relatable and authentic with these incredible messages and lessons learned woven throughout. But the book that I frequently come back to, it's the book that I've gifted most and that I've read the most amount of times is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
That's amazing. And if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
Mm. That's a great question. A historical figure. So the one that I would love to have dinner with is my grandfather. I've never thought about this in this context, but it's my truth in this moment. My mother's father passed away when she was 12, and I had incredible relationships with my grandparents that were alive through my childhood, adolescence, and post-college years. But I never had the opportunity to meet my mother's father. And I would love to sit down and really spend time with my grandfather who passed well before I was alive.
Well, thank you so much. If you have just one more piece of advice for a student today going out into the world of AI and navigating entrepreneurship, what would that be?
So the advice that I would give is to understand that the uncertainty that you feel is common and it never goes away. I think there's this perception that as others navigate their career, as they get to higher and higher levels of accomplishment, recognition, or title, that suddenly they have it figured out. And I think the willingness of leaders to express honesty and vulnerability is really at a premium. And the reality is for all of us that have been in positions of leadership, especially those that are at the forefront of industries where you are innovating and pushing for a new norm, you are figuring it out day to day, just like any student is figuring out themselves. And so it's important to have high aspirations, to have high goals, but also ensure that you are kind to yourself and that most importantly of all, you invest in the community around you and the deep relationships that you will form each stage of your life. And if I look at the relationships that have been most transformative in my life, it's those that encouraged my growth and didn't look at a decision that I made and said, you've changed in a critical way, but instead embraced that change and didn't necessarily even view it as change, but instead viewed it as evolution. Because ultimately, evolution is about building upon your past. It's about enriching a history or an identity and forging a better path forward based off of the shoulders of that past set of steps and journeys and experiences that you're drawing from.
Amazing. Ed.M. Braun, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for including me in today's conversation. I hope this is helpful for the broader Harvard community.
I know it will be. Cheers.